Mr. X walks into the US Army base and is immediately recognized as former bioweapon and super soldier. The military personnel there have already heard of him, and they are surprised to see him walk into the base. Mr. X makes his decision quickly and signs up to join the US Army as a new weapon for them. With the Umbrella Corporation gone, Mr. X has no further mission and can now use his skills and strength to serve the US Army instead. The US Army welcomes Mr. X to the base, taking him in as a new asset and a valuable weapon. They know of his past and are well aware of just how powerful and how deadly he can be on the battlefield. But they also see him as a tool, a weapon that can be wielded and controlled, a valuable asset in their fight against their enemies. Mr. X is silent as he walks into the base, his face expressionless and his body language stoic. He tips his hat as a greeting, a slight nod of his head in place of a verbal hello. The US Army personnel watch him enter, looking at him with a mixture of awe and a little fear as they see his massive frame and his intimidating presence. The soldiers in the base stare at the huge, bald, leather-clad behemoth as he walks past them. Towering over all of them, he is an imposing sight to behold, and they wonder how this former bioweapon and super soldier can be put to good use by the US Army. As Mr. X walks through the base, the soldiers remember that the US is currently at war with several enemies. There is Roman, a Russian general who has been causing trouble for the US, then the terrorist organization led by Vladimir Markov, and a killer group led by Omar Suleiman, also known as the Wolf. The US Army knows that they need all the help they can get against these formidable opponents, and they think that Mr. X might be the key to turning the tide in their favor. Mr. X is more than happy to accept to help the US Army in its war against its enemies. He is a seasoned warrior and a skilled fighter, and has no doubts that he can wreak havoc on the battlefield and turn the course of the war in their favor. The US Army is glad to have him on board, and they begin to make plans and strategy on how to best use him in the coming battles. Mr. X is loaded onto a military jet, his massive frame filling up most of the plane. The soldiers and pilots aboard the jet give him lots of space, looking at him with a little fear and awe as he moves onto the jet. The soldiers and pilots know how powerful and dangerous this former bioweapon can be, and they are both wary and excited to see him in action. The jet lifts up off the ground and starts flying, with Mr. X on board. He sits still and silently, waiting to reach its destination. The soldiers around him talk in hushed voices, speculating about where they are going and what they are going to do. Mr. X doesn't say a word. He sits quietly, focusing on the upcoming battle and how he can best serve the US Army in this war. Mr. X clenches his fists and cracking his neck, mentally and physically preparing himself for the battle that lies ahead. His muscles tense and his frame straightens up, his entire body shifting into battle mode. The soldiers see him doing this, and a ripple of excitement and anticipation goes through the jet. Mr. X sees the worried and fearful looks on the soldiers' faces, and he gives them a reassuring thumbs up. He knows that they are nervous and scared, but he wants to show them that they have nothing to worry about. He silently expresses his confidence and his readiness, letting them know that he is prepared for the upcoming battle. Mr. X is loaded onto a military jet, his massive frame filling up most of the plane. The soldiers and pilots aboard the jet give him lots of space, looking at him with a little fear and awe as he moves onto the jet. The soldiers and pilots know how powerful and dangerous this former bioweapon can be, and they are both wary and excited to see him in action. The jet lifts up off the ground and starts flying, with Mr. X on board. He sits still and silently, waiting to reach its destination. The soldiers around him talk in hushed voices, speculating about where they are going and what they are going to do. Mr. X doesn't say a word. He sits quietly, focusing on the upcoming battle and how he can best serve the US Army in this war. Mr. X clenches his fists and cracking his neck, mentally and physically preparing himself for the battle that lies ahead. His muscles tense and his frame straightens up, his entire body shifting into battle mode. The soldiers see him doing this, and a ripple of excitement and anticipation goes through the jet. Mr. X sees the worried and fearful looks on the soldiers' faces, and he gives them a reassuring thumbs up. He knows that they are nervous and scared, but he wants to show them that they have nothing to worry about. He silently expresses his confidence and his readiness, letting them know that he is prepared for the upcoming battle. The soldiers on the jet feel a little more reassured, seeing Mr. Confident and calm demeanor. They know that they are going up against some very dangerous enemies, but they feel a little more at ease knowing that they have such a powerful ally and weapon on their side. The jet continues flying, bringing them closer and closer to their destination. Mr. X is silent and still, waiting for the battle to begin. He can feel the tension and excitement in the air, the other soldiers around him getting more and more amped up as the destination looms closer. The jet lands and Mr. X is deployed into the battlefield. He steps out of the jet and into the heat of battle, his massive frame dwarfing the soldiers around him. He looks around, taking in the sights and sounds of the battlefield, ready to face whatever comes his way. As Mr. X walks towards the enemy side, the Russian soldiers can't help but feel a shiver of fear go down their spine. They have heard rumors of this man before. They know what he is and what he is capable of. Seeing him in person in a real battle situation, towering above them and looking as menacing as ever, is even more intimidating. The Russian soldiers start shooting at Mr., but their bullets and weapons have little to no effect on him. No matter what they do, they just can't seem to slow him down or stop his approach. Mr. X walks through the gunfire, barely slowing down and barely reacting to the bullets bouncing off his thick skin. Mr. X keeps walking closer and closer towards the Russian soldiers, his massive frame closing the gap between him and his enemies. The soldiers try to fire more bullets and throw more grenades at him, but none of their attacks have any effect on the superhuman. He is approaching quickly and with deadly intent. The Russian soldiers desperately throw grenades and bombs at Mr. hoping to slow him down or stop him in his tracks. But the bombs and grenades have only minimal effect on him, not even slowing down his approach. Mr. X stomps on a few grenades and crushes them effortlessly. The explosions going off around him but doing nothing more than slightly stirring the air around him. His hat and clothes stay undamaged, his imposing figure marching on towards the Russian soldiers. Mr. X finally reaches the front lines of Russian soldiers, towering above them like a giant. The Russian soldiers look up at him with fear in their eyes, realizing now just how massive and imposing he truly is. One poor soul tries to hit him with a baton, but Mr. X swiftly catches the baton and crushes it in his hand like it was nothing. Mr. X grabs the Russian soldier by the throat, his huge hand completely encircling the man's neck. He lifts him up off the ground with ease, holding the soldier aloft as if he weighed nothing. The soldier struggles in his grip, flailing around and trying to free himself, but it's no use. He is in the clutches of an unstoppable force. Mr. X begins violently slamming the Russian soldier into the ground repeatedly, his giant hands grabbing him and then throwing him into the hard, rocky ground. The soldiers around him watch the brutal display, both scared and awestruck by the incredible strength of their new weapon. Mr. X continues to slam the man into the ground relentlessly, the force of the attacks creating large craters in the ground as the Russian soldier desperately tries and fails to struggle free from the tyrant's grip. After brutalizing and incapacitating the first soldier, Mr. X turns and faces the rest of the Russian army. He stands tall and looks down at them with a terrifying glare, his massive frame and imposing presence instilling fear into the hearts of the Russian soldiers. They all just stand and stare at him, frozen in terror and unsure of what to do next. Mr. X charges into the Russian army, moving with incredible speed and power. He punches, grabs, and stomps his way through the Russian soldiers, taking them out one by one with ease. The soldiers try to fight back, but it's like a group of ants trying to take down an elephant. Mr. X is simply too strong, too fast, and too ruthless for them to handle. With each blow and step, Mr. X takes down several soldiers, the Russian army quickly falling apart in the face of his onslaught. The soldiers try to fight back and resist, but they are no match for the superhuman strength and power of the tyrant. Mr. X cuts a path through the army like a hot knife through butter, leaving dead and injured soldiers in his wake. After taking down the last Russian soldiers in his path, Mr. X heads to General Barkov's office. His footsteps are heavy and thunderous, his frame imposing and intimidating. He's on a war path, and nothing is going to stop him from reaching his target. Mr. X is determined and focused on his mission. He knows that General Barkov is a serious threat, and that taking him out will be crucial in helping the US win the war. He won't stop until he has accomplished his mission. He continues making his way to Barkov's office, his footsteps growing even more powerful and thunderous as he gets closer. Mr. X is like an unstoppable force, a juggernaut moving forward with a single-minded focus and determination. He doesn't tire, he doesn't slow down, and he doesn't stop. He is relentless, charging forward towards the general's office, nothing standing in his way. As Mr. X heads toward the office, he knows that he will likely come across more Russian soldiers and guards protecting the general. But he is prepared for this. He knows he is strong and powerful enough to take down however many opponents come his way, and nothing will stop him from reaching his goal. Sure enough, as Mr. X approaches the general's office, he is met with a group of Russian guards, all armed and ready for a fight. The soldiers raise their weapons and prepare to attack, but Mr. X just stands there, staring down the soldiers with a menacing and unforgiving glare. The Russian soldiers pause for a moment, intimidated by Mr. Sheer presence and power, but then they remember their orders and their duty, and they begin to fire at him. Bullets ricochet off his skin, leaving only scratches on his thick hide. The scratches that the bullets leave disappear almost immediately, his skin healing and closing up as if they had never been there. The Russian soldiers' eyes widen in disbelief, watching as their bullets and weapons have no effect on the superhuman. Mr. X wastes no time and immediately attacks the Russian soldiers. His fists fly, taking out soldiers left and right. The soldiers try to fight back, but their shots and melee attacks are useless against the superhuman's massive frame and thick skin. The last Russian soldier drops to the ground, crushed beneath Mr. Massive Hand. The Russian army in this area is effectively neutralized, and there is nothing between Mr. X and General Barkov's office. Mr. X crashes through the door of General Barkov's office, the heavy wooden door no match for his superhuman strength and power. He looks around the office, searching for the general, prepared to take him down. Mr. X quickly spots the general, standing behind his large desk at the other end of the office. General Barkov looks shocked and scared at the sight of the massive superhuman entering his office. Barkov quickly regains his composure, realizing that he is facing a very dangerous adversary. He tries to put on a confident and commanding face, but the fear is betraying him. Meanwhile, Mr. X just stands there, staring down the general with a cold and menacing glare. General Barkov tries to maintain his authority despite his growing fear. He tries to sound calm and collected, but his voice betrays him as a tremor of fear tinges his words. General Barkov tries to reason with Mr. Bargaining and offering deals and promises in a desperate attempt to sway him. But Mr. X is unwavering. His loyalty and obedience to the US are absolute, and nothing the general can say or do will change that. General Barkov realizes that bargaining is useless, as Mr. X doesn't have a voice to speak or negotiate with. Frustrated and desperate, he tries to manipulate the superhuman in other ways, but Mr. X remains unfazed, his loyalty unwavering and his focus undeterred. Unable to break through Mr. Stoicism or loyalty, General Barkov's attempts at negotiation only infuriate the superhuman, and Mr. X has had enough. He reaches out and grabs the general's face in his massive hand, holding him firmly and glaring down at him with a menacing glare. The general's screams are cut off as Mr. X tightens his grip, and with a quick squeeze, the general's face is crushed. The tyrant then lets go of the lifeless body, letting it collapse to the floor. He looks down at the dead Russian general, his mission complete. Mr. X slams his fists together, creating a loud and powerful sound that echoes through the room. In his own silent, non-verbal way, this is his way of congratulating himself on a job well done, and signaling that his mission has been successfully completed. After completing his mission and taking out General Barkov, Mr. X leaves the office and heads back to the US side of the battlefield. His footsteps are heavy, with an air of satisfaction and purpose to them. The US soldiers watch as he approaches, still intimidated but also impressed by his display of power and unwavering loyalty. The soldiers on the US side of the battlefield see Mr. X returning and begin to cheer and applaud, showing their support and admiration for his actions. They're still not quite used to the massive hulking figure, but they respect his strength and dedication to their cause. Mr. Mr. X tips his hat in response to the soldiers' applause and cheers. It's a gesture of appreciation and gratitude, a way for him to acknowledge their admiration and support in his own silent, non-verbal way. After the brief celebration, Mr. X heads back to the military jet that brought him here. He knows his job isn't done yet, and that there's another major enemy commander he needs to take down. He strides toward the jet, ready to continue his mission and bring down the next target on the U.S. hit list. Mr. X enters the military jet, the soldiers on board stepping back to give him room. They are still in awe of his sheer size and power, and can't help but watch him with a mix of fear and admiration as he takes a seat and readies himself for the next stage of the mission. The soldiers quickly get over their awe and prepare for takeoff. They have a new destination to reach and a new battle to fight. Mr. X sits silently, his massive frame seeming to fill up the entire jet as it lifts off the ground and begins its journey towards the next target. The military jet soars through the sky, racing towards southern Russia. The soldiers on board the jet are tense and focused, their weapons at the ready for the intense battle they know awaits them. Mr. X sits silently, his eyes fixed on the horizon as the jet approaches the location of Vladimir Markov's terrorist organization. The jet eventually lands in a clearing near the terrorist organization's base. It's a heavily fortified compound, guarded by armed guards and equipped with a variety of military and technological defenses. Mr. X is the first one off the plane, his imposing figure striding confidently towards the base. The soldiers quickly follow Mr. forming a small group of armed and armored troops. They are tense and wary, knowing that they are about to enter a dangerous and hostile environment. But they also take heart in the presence of the superhuman warrior, knowing that he is by their side and will be a valuable asset in the upcoming battle. As they approach the base, they can see the terrorists and guards stationed around the perimeter, all armed and ready for a fight. Mr. X leads the charge, his sheer size and power enough to intimidate even the bravest of the guards. Mr. X raises one hand, signaling for the U.S. Army soldiers to fall back and take cover. They quickly do so, watching from a distance as the superhuman prepares to take on the guards and terrorists by himself. The guards and terrorists see Mr. X approaching, their eyes widening in shock and fear at the sight of the massive superhuman, but they quickly regain their composure and prepare to attack, raising their weapons and getting into a defensive formation. The guards and terrorists fire their weapons at Mr., but the bullets and projectiles bounce off his thick skin like pebbles off a tank. His coat and clothes remain pristine and undamaged, not even a single scratch or rip appearing on them. The terrorists continue firing at him, trying in vain to bring him down with their weapons, but Mr. X just continues his steady approach, seemingly unfazed by the barrage of bullets and explosives being thrown at him. The sight of the unstoppable, bulletproof powerhouse is enough to sow fear and panic among the guards and terrorists. They can see that their weapons are useless against him, and their chances of defeating him are slim to none. Despite their fear, some of the terrorists and guards decide to fight anyway, charging at Mr. X with melee weapons and explosives, but their attacks are just as ineffective as the bullets, none managing to even scratch his skin. Mr. X moves through the terrorists and guards like a hot knife through butter, his sheer strength and power enough to take them down with ease. He uses his fists, his feet, and even his sheer size and weight to overpower and crush them, leaving a trail of unconscious and injured soldiers in his wake. After taking down the majority of guards outside the base, Mr. X strides forward and enters the terrorist compound. The interior of the base is dark and cramped, and Mr. Massive Frame barely fits through some of the doorways and halls. Mr. X comes across some doors that are too narrow for him to fit through, blocking his path. Without breaking his stride, he simply raises his fist and punches through them, shattering the door frame and creating an opening big enough for him to pass through. As Mr. X continues through the base, he comes across more guards. They see him coming and immediately open fire, but their bullets only bounce off his thick skin without leaving a scratch. Mr. X quickly and effortlessly takes down the guards one by one. His size and strength make light work of them, and the base is soon filled with the sounds of bodies being slammed into walls and punched into the ground. As Mr. X continues his rampage through the base, injured and unconscious guards behind him. Their weapons lay discarded and useless on the ground, unable to even scratch the superhuman. Mr. X moves with a single-minded purpose, searching for Vladimir Markov, his ultimate target. The base is a maze of corridors and rooms, but Mr. X seems to know exactly where he's going. His steps are confident and purposeful, as if he's following a map etched in his mind. The few guards who are foolish enough to get in his way are quickly dispatched, their screams adding to the symphony of chaos and destruction in the base. As he moves further into the base, Mr. X approaches a set of heavy reinforced steel doors. This seems to be the final barrier between him and Vladimir Markov, the mastermind behind the terrorist organization. The heavy reinforced steel doors tremble and groan under Mr. Powerful punches, but they stand no chance against the superhuman strength. With a few well-aimed blows, he manages to bend and break them, creating a large opening through which he strides confidently. As Mr. X enters the room, he spots Vladimir Markov, flanked by his bodyguards. The terrorist leader is taken aback by the sight of the massive superhuman, his eyes widening with fear and disbelief. Markov quickly regains his composure and tries to hide his fear behind a veneer of bravado. He glares at Mr. X defiantly, his eyes narrow and his hand on his holstered gun. The bodyguards around Markov tense, their hands on their own weapons and their eyes fixed on Mr. X. But they look nervous, knowing that their weapons and numbers are no match for the superhuman beast standing before them. Markov orders the bodyguards to fire at Mr., but the bullets only bounce off his skin without leaving a scratch. Mr. X just stands there unfazed by the hail of gunfire, a look of mild annoyance on his face. With a swift and powerful motion, Mr. X dispatches the bodyguards, knocking them out or leaving them groaning on the floor. He then turns his attention to Markov, his massive hand closing around the terrorist leader's throat and lifting him off the ground. Markov pleads and begs for his life, trying to reason with Mr. X and offer deals or bribes in exchange for his safety. But Mr. X is unmoved, his grip tightening around the terrorist leader's throat. He doesn't even respond to Markov's words, his face a frozen, emotionless mask. With a final defiant cry, Markov's pleas are cut off with a sickening crunch as Mr. X stomps on his head. Once Markov is eliminated, Mr. X stands there for a moment, the silence of the room interrupted only by the sound of his heavy breathing. He looks down at the lifeless body of the terrorist leader, his mission complete. Mr. X exits the base he came, leaving a trail of destruction and carnage in his wake. As he emerges from the compound, he can see the U.S. Army soldiers watching him from a distance, their eyes wide with awe and respect. The soldiers cheer and clap as Mr. X emerges from the base victorious. They can't believe what they've just witnessed, and what he has just accomplished single-handedly. They quickly board the plane, eager to return and report their success. With the mission in Russia successfully completed, the plane takes off and sets a new course for northern Urzikstan. The soldiers settle into their seats, still reeling from the recent battle and amazed by the power of Mr. X. Mr. X himself is silent and motionless, sitting in his spot as the plane flies through the night sky. The plane soars over the dark landscape of northern Urzikstan. The soldiers in the cabin, peering out the windows to catch a glimpse of the terrain below. They can see the rugged mountains and valleys of the region, and in the distance, a fortified compound surrounded by high walls and armed guards. As the plane approaches the compound, the soldiers begin to prepare for the next battle. They check their weapons, gear up, and discuss the strategy for entering the compound. Mr. X remains silent and stoic, his eyes fixed on the approaching base. The plane lands nearby, the soldiers quickly disembarking and taking cover in the surrounding area. They can see the compound, heavily fortified and guarded, and know that they'll have to strategize in order to infiltrate it and complete their mission. Mr. X raises his hand, signaling for the soldiers to fall back and take cover. They quickly do so, watching from a distance as the superhuman warrior prepares to face the heavily guarded compound by himself. The soldiers and onlookers watch as Mr. X approaches the compound, his massive form striding purposefully towards the guarded entrance. The guards standing watch at the gate see him coming, their eyes widening in shock and fear at the sight of the towering beast approaching. Despite their fear, the The guards quickly recover their composure and open fire on Mr. Their bullets and projectiles ricocheting off his skin like pebbles off a tank. Mr. X barely flinches, continuing his steady advance towards the gate. The guards continue firing, but their efforts are in vain. Mr. X just shrugs off the bullets and explosives thrown at him, the weapons having no effect on him. The guards start to panic, realizing that they're dealing with something far beyond their capabilities. Some of the more desperate guards try to attack Mr. X with knives or clubs, but they are quickly dispatched. Mr. X moves through them with brute force and speed, his fists and feet working in perfect harmony to take them down in quick succession. Mr. X disposes of the guards with ruthless efficiency, his massive fists and boots taking them out with ease. Pools of blood and bodies litter the ground around him as he continues his advance towards the compound's entrance. The guards outside the compound are quickly neutralized by Mr. Powerful attacks, leaving the entrance unguarded and the way clear for him to enter the compound. After successfully taking out the guards, Mr. X signals the U.S. Army to follow him into the compound. The soldiers quickly obey, their hearts racing with a mix of fear and adrenaline as they prepare to enter the heavily fortified base. The soldiers cautiously follow Mr. X as he strides into the compound, their weapons at the ready and their eyes darting back and forth to scan the surroundings. They can see the heavily fortified buildings and guard stations, as well as the armed guards patrolling the area. The soldiers stick close to Mr. staying in the cover provided by his massive frame. They can feel the tension in the air, knowing that they're stepping into enemy territory and that they could be discovered at any moment. Mr. X signals for the soldiers to take cover as they reach a large building located at heart of the compound. The soldiers quickly obey, finding cover behind the nearby rocky outcrops and walls, their eyes darting around the area for signs of more guards. Mr. X pushes open the door to the abandoned building, the hinges creaking loudly in the eerie silence. The room inside is dimly lit, with broken windows and crumbling furniture. There is no sign of any guards, but the silence is almost deafening. Mr. X moves further inside slowly and carefully, his footsteps echoing softly in the empty room. The soldiers watching from outside can barely make out his shape in the darkness, their hearts pounding in their chests as they watch and wait. Mr. Sensitive Ears pick up the sound of a voice coming from behind a pair of locked double doors. He stops in his tracks and turns his head towards the doors, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Peering through the window in the door, Mr. Eyes narrow as he sees the wolf holding 5 U.S. Army soldiers captive. The terrorist leader is holding a machete to the neck of one of the soldiers, clearly about to execute him in front of the video camera. Enraged by the sight of the captured soldiers and the threat against their lives, Mr. X delivers a powerful blow to the double doors, busting them open with a loud bang. The wolf looks up in surprise, taken aback by the sudden entry of the superhuman. Mr. X strides up to the wolf, his massive footsteps making the ground tremble. The terrorist leader looks up at the colossal superhuman with a mixture of fear and defiance in his eyes, his grip on the machete loosening slightly. With lightning speed, Mr. X grabs the wolf by the throat, his massive hand fully enveloping the terrorist leader's neck. He lifts him off the ground, and the wolf gasps and struggles to free himself from the superhuman's vice-like grip. Mr. X continues to strangle the wolf, his grip never loosening as he watches the terrorist leader gasp and sputter for air. The other soldiers in the room watch, their eyes wide with awe and terror at the sight of the superhuman. Mr. X releases the wolf's neck from his grip, and the leader falls to the ground gasping for breath. Before he can even recover, Mr. X pounces on him, delivering a powerful punch to his face. The punch delivered by Mr. X is so strong that it ends the wolf's life instantly, the terrorist leader's body crumpling to the ground in a heap. The other soldiers in the room stare at the scene in shock and awe, their captor defeated in an instant by the superhuman powerhouse. Mr. X turns to face the captive soldiers, his expression one of cold determination and triumph. He signals to the U.S. Army soldiers outside, who quickly rush into the room, their hearts pounding with relief at the sight of their freed comrades. As the Army soldiers enter the room, they rush to the aid of their captured comrades, untying them and helping them up. The room is filled with the sounds of joyful reunion and relief. the soldiers embracing and congratulating each other on their freedom. Among the captured soldiers, there is a mix of emotions. Some are still in shock from the experience, their faces drained of color and their hands shaking. Others are rejoicing, pumping their fists and letting out whoops of joy at their unexpected deliverance. With the mission accomplished and the soldiers rescued, Mr. X and the U.S. Army soldiers make their way back to the jet, their steps lighter and their spirits higher than before. The soldiers are talking amongst themselves, their voices a mix of relief and excitement as they buckle in for takeoff. As the plane takes off and lifts into the air, the soldiers look out the windows at the landscape below. The rugged mountains and valleys of northern Urzikstan disappear from sight as the plane gains altitude, on its way back to the U.S. in safety. Inside the cabin, the soldiers are still buzzing with adrenaline and joy. They clap each other on the back and exchange stories of their captivity and their rescue. Mr. X sits silently in his seat, his stoic face revealing nothing of his thoughts or emotions. The hours pass by slowly, but eventually, the plane touches down on a runway in the U.S. The soldiers exit the jet, their uniforms disheveled and their faces weary but their spirits high. They are met by fellow soldiers and officials, who congratulate them on their safe return and on the success of the mission. As Mr. X steps off the plane, he is immediately met by a thunderous applause and cheers from the U.S. Army soldiers gathered on the tarmac. They clap and hoot and holler, congratulating him on his valiant efforts and thanking him for rescuing their captured comrades. Mr. X responds to the applause and cheers with a small nod and a tip of his hat. Despite his stoic demeanor, there is a hint of a smile on his face, and he stands a little straighter, feeling a sense of satisfaction and respect from the Army personnel. The soldiers around him continue to cheer and clap, their voices a chorus of gratitude and admiration. They clap him on the back and shake his hand, their eyes full of gratitude and respect. Mr. X is overwhelmed by the show of support and appreciation, his cold exterior cracking slightly as he feels a surge of pride and satisfaction. The U.S. Army personnel lead Mr. X to an isolated part of the military base, and he is surprised to see a large mansion waiting for him. The soldiers explain that they built the mansion for him to live in, not just as a bioweapon, but as a living being deserving of respect and dignity. Although Mr. X doesn't express it, he is touched by the gesture and appreciative of the Army's decision. Mr. X shows his appreciation for the soldiers' efforts with a double thumbs up and a second tip of his hat. The soldiers smile and nod, understanding his silent message of gratitude and respect. They leave him to explore his new home, their hearts warmed by the sight of the stoic superhuman showing a small hint of humanity. Mr. X walks into the mansion and is immediately taken aback by the luxuriousness of the interior. The walls are made of strong, elegant marble, and the furnishings are lavish and refined. Despite his tough exterior, he can't help but be impressed by the opulence of his new surroundings. As Mr. X explores further, he notices that some parts of the marble walls are adorned with artwork and decorative elements. The attention to detail and craftsmanship is impressive, and the artwork adds a touch of culture and refinement to the luxurious surroundings. Wandering through the different rooms, Mr. X finds that the living room has a huge flat-screen TV, accompanied by a comfortable couch and coffee table. The kitchen is outfitted with modern appliances and has a stylish design. The dining room draws his attention with its decorative dark red paint on the upper half of the wall, with a brown on the lower half. The room has a sophisticated and inviting ambiance. Making his way upstairs, Mr. X steps into the bedroom and is struck by the luxuriousness and opulence of the space. The bed is king-sized and outfitted with satin sheets and fluffy pillows. Across the hall, he finds an office with a large desktop computer set up with 3 screens, equipped to handle his needs. Additionally, the next room is revealed to be a gaming room, offering him the chance to relax and play games with the soldiers or on his own time. The gaming room is well appointed, with an array of gaming consoles and a large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. There is also a comfortable sofa and a couple of chairs, providing a relaxing environment to unwind. It's a stark contrast from his usual duties, and he can't help but feel a strange sense of contentment in this luxurious setting. Mr. X heads back downstairs to the living room and approaches the flat-screen TV. With a few buttons, he powers it on, and the screen comes to life, bathing the room in a soft glow. He takes a seat on the couch, his body relaxing into the soft cushions as he idly flips through the channels, looking for something interesting to watch. Mr. X sits back, his large frame sinking deeply into the plush cushions of the couch. As he flips through the channels, a sense of contentment washes over him. He feels a sense of pride and accomplishment, knowing that he played a pivotal role in helping the U.S. Army win the war. Despite his stoic face, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of his lips. For the next several hours, Mr. X stayed parked on the couch, relaxing and watching whatever was on TV. The luxurious setting, combined with the comfortable surroundings, provided a sense of contentment and tranquility that he rarely experienced in his usual line of work.